Hey, let me say this before we begin with the questions and answers. I am answering these tonight as if this were a debate, so to speak, where I'm talking to an adversary. If you're talking to a young woman who's thinking about abortion, you're going to want to handle this in a much different manner than how I'm handling it tonight. So tonight's all about information, but know we care about these pregnant women. And if you're talking to a woman who is considering abortion, the first thing she needs to hear from you is not, I've got an argument to beat your arguments. The first thing she needs to hear is, we love and care for you. And you can get to the arguments a little later, and you should get to the arguments a little later, but don't misunderstand what we're doing tonight as how to sit down with a young woman in crisis who is making a decision about abortions. So we're going to go through this. I hope you have your outline. Might have time for questions at the end, probably not, but perhaps. So jot some down as we go through this if I don't answer one of these sufficiently. All right, Ethan, give us question number 1.
All right. If we determine death by the absence of the heartbeat or measurable brain activity, why shouldn't we determine the beginning of life by the presence of those same things?
You know, that's a really good question. If someone's in the hospital and they're trying to decide if that person has died, what do? They listen for a heartbeat. If the person is on life support, they will test for brainwave activity. I mean, please know I'm not the kind of doctor that can help you tonight, so I'm going to be fuzzy on the medical details. So some people will ask if that's how we determine if there's life on that end of the life cycle, then why don't we determine if it's life on the front end of the life cycle the same way? And there are a number of weeks, and I don't know specifically, but there is a period of time after fertilization, a significant period of time where there is no heartbeat and there is no measurable brain activity. But the important thing for us to know is that death and the beginning of life, the end of life and the beginning of life, are not mirror images of each other. This is a category error. And you're going to see that through many of these questions, where people are taking things in two different categories and trying to compare them together. When we declare someone to be dead after looking for a heartbeat or brain activity, we say that in the absence of those things, that indicates that a person's life is over and cannot by any natural means be recovered. Now listen, the person is not dead because there's no heartbeat or brain activity. No, there's no heartbeat or brain activity because the person is dead. Do you see? There's a difference there. When we go to the other end of life, the fact that there is no heartbeat or brain activity in the very early stages, that is not an indication that life has ended. It's just an indication that life has begun and it is not yet fully developed. Does that make sense? And so a person who at the end of life has no heartbeat or brain activity, they're dead. But the fetus in the womb, no heartbeat or brain activity at the very earliest stages, it's just a matter of time. They will have heartbeat and brain activity, and they will live. So it's a category error. We're comparing two things that are not the same. Give us question number 2. Ethan?
The unborn cannot survive independently outside the womb. Doesn't that mean it's simply a part of the woman's body rather than a distinct human organism?
Okay, so before we answer the question, I want us to practice something. So tonight, if I point to you, to any of you, to all of you, I want you to say something out loud. Trot out the toddler, okay? This is important because 90% of the debates you may have about abortion, the answer, the way to win the debate is to do what? Okay, very good. So here the question is, an unborn cannot survive independently outside the womb. You know, the baby is in the womb, and apart from the womb, the baby could not survive. And so the baby must simply be a part of the mother's body, not a distinct organism. Well, the first thing we should do is what? Very good. A newborn also cannot survive independently, right? If we had a toddler up here and we didn't do anything for that toddler, a 2-week-old toddler, then that toddler would die. Now, should we say then that that toddler is not a real person? That toddler has no value because that toddler cannot survive without the assistance of its mother or someone else? No. If we just focus on it being a toddler, well, clearly, being independent is not what makes life valuable. It is something else. Now, another answer to this same question is embryology is very clear on this. A new genetically distinct human organism exists. That baby in the womb, from its very earliest stages, it has its own DNA. It directs its own growth, its own development. It is its own organism. That's not something the Bible says. That's something science says, medical science says. Every doctor, saved or lost, Christian or unbeliever, will admit that is a separate organism with its own DNA, and it self-directs its own development. It's not a part of the mother in the womb any more than it is when it is breastfeeding as an infant. A body part shares the same genetic identity as the host. A body part, an organ, or a tumor would share the same genetic identity as the host, exists for the host, and does not coordinate its full developmental trajectory. It is dependent on the host in that it's connected in every way. The embryo, just as an example, often has a different blood type than the mom. Did you know that? An embryo often has a very different gender than the mom, right? The embryo is its own person and separate from the mom. Now, let me give you a third answer to this question. Sometimes then people will point to viability, and they'll say, well, it's not truly a person until it is viable. That means it can live outside the womb. Well, I think we've already established that that wouldn't be a very good measurement of true personhood. But if viability were the point at which this fetus were a person, then you would have to admit that viability depends on technology, right? Some hospitals, some medical care facilities will have technology that would allow a baby at an earlier stage to live than what some other hospitals would have. And so viability then just depends on the technology that would be available. It also would depend upon your geography, right? Viability is way earlier here in America than it is in the Sudan, right? You can't have a premature baby survive in the Sudan, but you can have a premature baby survive. We just had 33-week-old twins born in our church. Not actually in our church, but people in our church just had 33-week-old twins. Viability here in America is at one point. In Africa, it's at another point. If viability were the determining factor, it would depend on geography. It would also just depend on history, right? 100 years ago, pretty much the baby was to term or the baby died. You know, there was no real viability before term. And so viability can't determine when someone becomes a person because viability is dependent upon so many things. Now, I'll give you answer number 4. I don't have 4 answers for all of these. But independence is not a requirement for being a human being. So the argument was that baby in the womb is not independent. It would die apart from being in the womb, and so it's not a person. Well, independence, if we allow independence to be what determines if someone is a human, then what about someone who is a dialysis patient? Now that dialysis patient has no independence. Apart from his dialysis, he's going to die and die quickly. What about somebody on a ventilator? Somebody who conjoined twins. They're dependent upon each other in some cases for survival. What about a severely disabled adult? Those people may not have independence, but there's no question that those people are real people and they have value. So the baby in the womb, we can't say that it has no value. It is not a person because it is dependent, because many people are dependent. All right?
Even if the fetus is biologically human, that doesn't mean it's a person with rights. Simply being biologically alive, even genetically human, doesn't make something a person. After all, tumors are alive too.
So let's start with the tumor question. A tumor is alive, but a tumor is not a person. Well, we've really already covered that. A tumor is not its own organism. It doesn't have its own DNA. It doesn't direct its own growth. It's not going to become eventually a fully independent person. A tumor is a disorganized growth, part of another organism with no independence. It is the same genetic identity. But how do we really answer this question? Let me read it again. If the fetus is biologically human, that does not mean it is a person with rights. Simply being biologically alive, even genetically human, does not make something a person. After all, tumors are alive too. So what should we do? We should trot out the toddler, okay? So if that little baby, 15 minutes after it's born, has full rights, has full value, if that is a person, then there's really nothing that has changed between right after the baby is born and right before the baby is born. If that being a person has to come from something other than one's independence, the independence changes slowly and little. Number 4.
A fetus has never been conscious, never had thoughts, never had awareness. Personhood requires a functioning mind, meaning rationality, self-awareness, or moral agency. The unborn do not yet have those abilities.
So you tell me what we would do here. We would trot out the toddler. Okay, so a fetus doesn't have much awareness. A fetus has some awareness, right? And can respond to stimuli. But a fetus doesn't have much awareness, has some thoughts, but not a lot of thoughts, has some consciousness, but not a lot of consciousness, some rationality, some self-awareness, very little more agency perhaps. But wouldn't you say those same things about an infant, right? Infants don't have much rationality, at least not much more than a baby in the womb. Infants have very little self-awareness, very little moral agency. Wouldn't you say that about most teenagers? Little self-awareness, little rationality. So if we're going to make those things the standard, then we've got a problem. And that would lead us to ask, if we have more of those things, are we more valuable? And so if we're going to say that a baby is not a baby in the womb has no value because that baby has little intelligence, well, then could we say if one of you has more intelligence than the other, then that first person has more value than the second person? Maybe a person who has an IQ of 80, well, maybe those people should be executed because they don't think on the same level as someone who might have a higher IQ. We can't make personhood dependent upon rationality and self-awareness or moral agency, because all those things are on a continuum. And if we just trot out the toddler, we recognize that all the arguments to say that that baby in the womb is not a person, you could use those same arguments to say a 1-year-old is not a person, and maybe a 13-year-old is not a person. Number 5.
An embryo may become a person someday, but it is not one yet. You're confusing a potential person with an actual person.
So the best question there is, well, what is the key development if there are potential people and people? Where do you make that change from a potential person to a person? What makes the change? Is it when you have a certain level of intelligence? Is it when you have a certain level of independence? Is it when you have a certain level of moral agency? Well, all of those things are on a continuum, right? And again, we could trot out the toddler and we could say that if you could make an argument that a 30-week term baby is only a potential person, probably the exact same argument you made to say the 30-year-old term baby in the womb is only a potential person. You could use that same argument to say a 1-year-old is just a potential person. So we would just trot out the toddler. Number 6.
If identical twins can develop from a single embryo, how can personhood begin at conception? We don't even know how many persons exist at that point.
So I didn't even know this was an argument until I had done some reading a few weeks ago. I didn't know how you had, how identical twins came about. I still don't know a lot about it, but it's called twinning. I don't know if that's what doctors actually call it, but in the literature I was reading, it's called twinning. So for identical twins, apparently there are multiple ways you can end up with twins, but at least one way is the egg is fertilized and there is one embryo, just one embryo. And then at a very early stage, this isn't the only way to get twins, but this is one way to get identical twins. At a very early stage, that one embryo splits into two. I have no idea how, okay? So some would suggest, I read the articles, but I still have no idea how. Some suggest then that life cannot begin at conception because in those cases, we don't even know how many lives we have at conception. We have a life, but it could be 2 lives. Well, the response to that, I think, is pretty simple. Just because we didn't know how many lives were going to come out of that embryo does not mean that the embryo was not alive, right? We know that there's at least one life. We may find out in these rare cases that one life becomes 2 lives. So far as when life began, for one of those people, life began at conception, at fertilization. For the other one, life began at division, at some point that you'd have to ask a doctor about. But the abortion argument stands to destroy this embryo or embryos, whether it's at the stage of 1 or at the stage of 2, before or after this secondary division. It still destroys a human life, okay? Is there confusion about, at least on my part, is there confusion about how and when you know if there's 1 baby or 2? Yes, I'm confused about it, but I don't understand why the pro-abortion people can bring this up as an argument, because there's no question it's a baby. Maybe it's 1 baby, maybe it's 2 babies, but it is a baby, and so it should not be aborted. You have to understand that some of these pro-abortion arguments are, and I want to be charitable, but I think some of them are just meant to confuse the matter. let's just confuse things. So, well, how can you say that life begins at conception when we don't even know how many lives we have? Well, even if we give them the premise, even if we say, well, we don't know how many lives, and maybe we do, like I said, I mean, that's a scientific thing that's beyond my understanding. But even if we give them the premise, we don't know how many lives are there, there's still a life there, at least one, right? So abortion would be wrong. All right, question 7.
Even if the fetus is a person, no one has the right to use someone else's body without consent. Pregnancy requires exactly that. The government should not be able to force a woman to use her body to sustain another life.
Okay, of all the arguments, don't tell them, but I think this is their best argument. I think this is the hardest argument to refute. Now, if you hear it, generally it's given as what they call the violinist argument. Have you ever heard that? I don't know who thought this up, but this is the argument that they repeat often. You wake up from a dream, I guess, or from a deep sleep. You wake up and you are involuntarily connected to a famous violinist. So I don't know if you're connected to them somehow. I mean, you've been sewn together. You're interchanging blood. I mean, this is a made-up story. And you're told that the famous violinist will die unless you remain attached to him for 9 months. You do not consent, therefore you unplug yourself and the violinist dies. So did you kill the violinist? I mean, it's absurd, right? Let's go to question number 8, because this is how I think it's more cleverly phrased, and I'll answer it from that.
We don't force people to donate kidneys or blood to save someone else's life. Why should pregnancy be the one exception?
So we say, as those who are pro-life, to the mom, it may be a real inconvenience for you to carry this baby to term, but it's worth it because it's a person, and it's worth anything to save that person's life, the life of the baby that is within you. Well, a clever pro-abortion person might say, well, what if it turns out that there's somebody in Nacogdoches who desperately needs a kidney or a liver in order to survive? And if they don't get this kidney or liver, they're going to die, and you're the only person who is compatible enough to give them what they need. Should you then be compelled to give up a kidney to save that person, whether you want to or not? And of course, we would say, well, no, nobody should be compelled to give up a kidney, even if it does save a person's life. My body, my choice. My kidney, my choice. And they would say, well, then it's the same thing. You shouldn't be able to say to a pregnant woman, you have to give up the health of your body for 9 months. And pregnancy can be, at times, can be a very dangerous condition, right? People can suffer permanent injury or death because they're pregnant. So you can't say, they would say to us, you can't force a woman to give up agency over her body for 9 months just to save the life of a baby, if we can't force someone to give up a kidney to save the life of someone in Nacogdoches. Well, so here's the answer. First, let's look at an ordinary pregnancy, not rape or incest. We're going to get to rape and incest in a moment. But in an ordinary pregnancy, the unborn did not invade the body as a stranger, right? The parent's voluntary action, now we're talking about not rape or incest, the parent's voluntary action created the dependent life. Pregnancy is not a case of random kidnapping, okay? Aside from rape or incest, if you are pregnant, you share some responsibility for being pregnant, right? At least some responsibility for being pregnant. So there's a moral difference between actively killing someone, there's a baby in me and I'm gonna kill it, and withdrawing extraordinary life support from a stranger, I'm not gonna give a stranger my kidney even if he needs it to save his life. See, abortion is not merely withholding support. If somebody in Nacogdoches dies because I don't give them a kidney, I have withheld support, perhaps, and they have died because of that, perhaps. But abortion is not that. Abortion is actively killing somebody. Now, if I knew that Fred needed a kidney and he needed my kidney, and without my kidney he might die, and so I go to his house and I shoot him in the head, okay, that's different. Now he's not died because I didn't give him a kidney. Now he's died because I have actively killed him. That baby in the womb, abortion is about actively killing a baby. A lot of different ways that they do abortion today. Dismemberment, one of the most common. Chemical poisoning, induced death. That is not passive refusal, that is intentional killing. That is not the same as me saying, I will not give you my kidney. That is actively killing somebody. But then there's a second answer. And we could, again, trot out the toddler? Even in secular law, parents have special obligations to their children. If you're a parent and you have a newborn, and that newborn gets on your nerves and is a burden to you, can you just put the newborn on the sidewalk and just leave him and allow him to be exposed and die? Can you do that? Can you say, listen, I'm not obligated to sacrifice my body, energy, time, effort for somebody else? Well, actually, if you're a parent, you are, right? You cannot just, I'm not going to give up of myself for that. No, in America, in any law country, parents have a legal responsibility to care for those children. And if you're pregnant, you have a child, and you have a legal opportunity. I do not have a legal opportunity to give Fred a kidney. But if I have a child in the womb or out of the womb, I have a legal opportunity to care for that child. You cannot starve an infant because feeding him would require too much effort on your part. No, you have an obligation. Parents have created or accepted responsibility for the dependent child. Pregnancy is simply the earliest stage of that same parent-child relationship that we would see with a 1-year-old. I'll give you a third answer to the question. Some will argue, consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy. They would say, I consented to sex, but I did not consent to being pregnant. Well, I think that's one of the most foolish arguments. Actions have foreseeable consequences, right? If you consent to sex, you have to at least accept the possibility that you may get pregnant. If I say, if I drive recklessly and I injure someone, and I say, I consented to drive recklessly, but I didn't consent to supporting someone that might get hurt because I drove recklessly. You might not have consented to support them, but you had to understand when you decided to drive recklessly, that a foreseeable consequence is that somebody might be injured, and then you would be responsible for those injuries. I'll give you answer number 4. What about the cases of rape and incest? Well, my answer is, we'll get to that question in a moment, because that's a different answer. Number 9.
Even if the fetus has rights, the pregnant woman also has rights. When two sets of rights conflict, how can you simply say the fetus's rights override the mother's?
So, do you understand the argument? I understand the fetus has rights, but I have rights too. Why does the fetus's rights beat my rights? Now, you see, that can be a powerful argument. We have to be smarter than that. They're saying that there is a hierarchy of rights, that that there's a conflict between my rights and the baby's rights. So how can you say that the baby's rights beat my rights? Now listen, we're going to be smarter than that. There is a hierarchy of rights here, but it's not my rights versus the baby's rights. It's the right to live versus the right for bodily autonomy. You see, that's a difference. If this were strictly my rights versus the baby's rights, well then some people would make an argument that the baby is innocent and so the baby's rights win. And some people might say, well, the person has some moral agency and their rights should win. But that's not the fight here. It's not the woman's rights versus the baby's rights. It's the right to live versus the right to bodily autonomy. You know, we said a couple of weeks ago, I have rights for my body, but my rights stop where? Where your rights start. And so I can walk up to Ethan and I can move my hands around all I want. But just before my fist collides with his nose, my rights stop, my bodily autonomy stops, and the sacredness of his nose starts, right? So there's a limit to rights. So it's not a conflict between the baby's rights versus the mother's rights. That's the wrong way to look at it. The baby has a right to live. You could say, well, the mother has a right to her bodily autonomy. She might not want to be uncomfortable or to take the risks of pregnancy for 9 months. Well, I'm not saying those aren't unimportant rights, but when you compare the right to live versus the right to not be pregnant for an extended period of time, well, now it's pretty easy to see which rights beat the other rights. We have to be careful that we don't let pro-abortion people make this a baby versus mother issue. No, it is life versus convenience. That's the issue. And when we frame it that way, people better understand it. Now, there is another answer. I don't remember the question. If the fetus has rights, the pregnant woman also has rights. All right, we can, trot out the toddler. A newborn baby, so let's think about a baby that's already born. The newborn baby also requires a mother to set aside her rights. Set aside her rights of freedom. That mother has to take care of the baby. Set aside the rights to sleep 8 hours a night, as the mother and the father, hopefully, are taking care of the baby. So we're clear that when the baby is born, that the mother is obligated to sacrifice her rights for the baby. At that point, it's easy to see it's not the baby versus the mom. It's the baby's right to live versus the mom's right to be convenienced. The mom should sacrifice her rights. Well, if that's true for a 1-year-old or a 2-week-old, it's also true for an infant. Just trot out the toddler. All right, now we get to the hard questions. Number 10.
If a woman becomes pregnant through rape or incest, forcing her to carry that pregnancy only compounds the trauma she has already endured.
Okay, so this is both a real situation and it is an attempt to confuse the argument. So here's the situation. Rape is terrible. A violent assault, profound injustice, a moral evil. The woman is innocent. She's been violated. She's been wronged in the deepest way possible. And if we're talking to someone who's going through this, the first thing we should do is show compassion and love and tender care for a woman who has been unbelievably abused. But that aside, the first answer is honestly, though, while the rape adds to the emotional complexity of the situation, the facts remain the same. The moral question has not changed. If that fetus is a person, if that is a baby, then that fetus must be protected. And I cannot imagine how hard and difficult that would be but the complexities of the emotions do not change the equation of life. The child was not the aggressor. The child still bears God's image, and the child is not morally tainted by the father's crime. The rape, as horrible as that is, it does not change the equation of life. And that's hard for people to say. It's hard for people to wrap their arms around, because it is such an emotional thing. And we need to acknowledge the emotional complexity of that. But the baby is still the baby. The baby is still a person. Now, the second answer is, I hate to even say this because it'll sound so insensitive, but we just have to trot out the toddler, right? So let's say if we had a 6-month-old here, and that 6-month-old had been conceived because of rape, how many people would be, even the most strident pro-choice people, how many people would be for killing the baby, smothering the baby, because the baby's presence is causing undue trauma for the mom? Nobody would be for smothering the 6-month-old. Well, if that's the case, I mean, if you can make a case for killing the baby in the womb because of the trauma to the mom, then you would be able to make a case for smothering the 6-month-old because of the trauma to the mom. They're morally equivalent decisions. Answer number 3, while this does not take away from the tragic nature of any single case, rape and incest account for a very small percentage of abortions. It happens. It happens. If you look at the numbers, I looked at the numbers this week, 36,000 times a year. That's a lot, okay? But this is a big country. The majority of people who are raped do not become pregnant as a result of that. Now, some do, and that is a tragic situation, which brings us to answer number 4. We just need to show compassion. And I think that is where, not that every woman who has been raped should give up her baby. Some do, some don't. That should be their choice. But the church should be ready to receive people in the church, and people in our church would be. If a young woman has been raped and it is very traumatic, we ought to be ready to take that baby if she needed someone to do so. Number 11.
There are real medical situations where continuing the pregnancy threatens the mother's life. In those cases, is an abortion necessary to save her?
So there certainly are situations where a woman's life can be in danger. Ectopic pregnancy is the one that people think about first. There are probably others that I just don't know about. So does that, is abortion, if an abortion is done to save the mother's life, is that a sin? Let me give you 3 answers. Number 1, or they're all the same answer, but 3 reasonings. Number 1, perspective is everything. If the primary and ultimate medical goal is to kill the baby, then that's bad. Okay? If the doctor's goal, if the ultimate goal is we're going to kill the baby, then that's abortion. That's killing a baby. But if the primary and ultimate medical goal is to save the life of the mother, then we should save the life of the mother. Does that make sense? That's not killing a baby. If a woman is pregnant and doctors have to do something to keep that pregnancy from killing her, and what they do as a secondary result is going to destroy that baby, well, then they should do that. They should save the mother's life, and that certainly is not any kind of sinful abortion. Let me give you a second answer. These situations are medically rare, and no pro-life group has ever opposed taking all reasonable precautions necessary to save the life of the mother. This is an issue that's brought up just to confuse things. When you hear in a pro-abortion debate, when you hear them talk about ectopic pregnancies and other situations, and we've got to save these moms. Yeah, everybody agrees. That's not a part of the debate. That is just stuck in there to confuse the debate. No pro-life group is for risking the life of a mom in a pregnancy beyond what is reasonable. And then the third answer, are there some very complex situations that do not neatly fit into one category or the other? Yes, there have been some since I've been here as your pastor. I've worked with families through a number of these in my 30 plus years being a pastor. But there are also complex situations when the fire department shows up and there's been a terrible accident and there's a minivan on fire and it's filled with people. And they're going to have to make some very complicated moral decisions. And in that case, we just need to step back and let parents and doctors work those things out. We don't have to have a structure that, I can write it down and then this applies to every situation that ever happens in the world. That's impossible because there are some very complex situations that happen. If the primary purpose is to kill a baby, it shouldn't happen. If the primary purpose is to save the life of a mom, it should happen. If there's some very complex situation that could be seen as in one realm or the other, for instance, when I've dealt with it, it's usually concerning a mom who has cancer and the cancer treatment is complicated with the baby. And nobody was asking me medical advice, so I don't understand all the medical stuff. But I know, at least in some of those cases, it seemed to me like this is very complex. And I think in those situations, I don't think a preacher or the church should step in and say, this is what you ought to do. In those morally complex situations, that's why we have good doctors, Christian doctors, and loving parents. Number 12.
If doctors know a child will be born with a severe disability and face a life of profound suffering, isn't it more compassionate to prevent that suffering?
Okay, so this question comes up often. This isn't an abortion debate at the university kind of question. This is real life questioning. So how should we answer this? Again, with great sensitivity, we should trot out the toddler. What do I mean by that? If we had a 1-year-old who had severe disabilities, maybe unable to, maybe that child is not going to be able to walk, or that child is not going to be able to speak, or that child is not going to be able to have good motor, that child has disabilities. Would we do everything we could to love on that 1-year-old, or would we just smother it to death? No question, we would do everything we could to love on that little baby. And I think that answers the question. The question becomes, is a life of severe disability worth living? Well, that is such a hard question, because who would determine that? And what would be the standard, and what would be the authority? It's either yes or no. And I think the only answer we can say is yes. By the way, many people with severe disabilities consistently report meaningful relationships, joyful lives, purpose in living, and gratitude for life. So I think I brought this up a couple of years ago. Is it Iceland or Denmark that has eradicated? What did they say that they had eradicated? Yeah, they had eradicated Down syndrome. Well, that's foolish. They didn't eradicate Down syndrome. They killed all of the Down syndrome babies. Listen, that for a mom and dad to get the news that the baby that they're about to have is going to have Down syndrome would be, a very difficult burden. But many of those Down syndrome kids, listen, they live lives happier than mine and yours a lot of days, right? And yeah, they're different. We're different. God loves them. God loves us. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be a difficult burden for a parent, but life is life. Another answer to the same question, once we decide that whatever makes life sacred is diminished by suffering, then we've set up a frightening scale. If we say, well, this life isn't worth anything because of the suffering, okay, now we've said that suffering and the value of life are connected. So then should we start killing people who were maimed in car accidents? What if somebody were in a car accident and they lost the use of their legs, or they injured their head and they no longer had the faculties that they had before? Should we kill those people? I mean, once we say that how much you suffer determines how valuable your life is, we're going to have a lot of other questions that are going to be tough to answer. Should we kill people then? And this is a real deal in Canada right now. Should we kill people because they are a financial burden to their family? And so all this euthanasia in Canada, and now they're allowing these seniors to end their lives, and it's family that helped them make the decision. They can end their lives, if they have terminal illness. There's a lot of things. But now on that list, one of the reasons they can end their life is because it's a financial burden on the family. And good night. I don't know how long my kids would let me live. Number 13.
The Bible itself records Job and Solomon saying that it would have been better not to be born. If that's true, why is preventing a life of suffering automatically wrong?
All right. Unless you object, we're going to skip this one because I want to hit them all. We'll come back to this one if we have time. Let's go to question 14.
Being made in the image of God is a religious belief. In a pluralistic society, you can't base public policy on theology that not everyone accepts.
Well, that's a pretty powerful sounding argument until you take it apart. Every law reflects some moral vision of what humans are and what they're worth and what justice requires. We outlawed slavery 200 years ago, right? Almost. Why did we outlaw slavery? There are a lot of people that thought slavery was a really good idea, right? We outlawed slavery, and especially if you go back to the abolition movement before it came to America, but that was a religious thing. That was a Christian thing that we outlawed. It came from Christian revivals and throughout Europe, especially in England. And we have embraced that as right. There shall not be slaves. Well, that's a morality that is a Christian morality. All of our laws express someone's morality, and many of our laws express biblical morality. What about racial discrimination? What about child abuse? Those are all expressions of what we think is right and valuable and true. Why do we outlaw those things? Because we believe human beings possess intrinsic value. So people will say, well, you shouldn't base your laws on religion. Okay, then what do you think we should base our laws on? Well, it turns out they're all already based on religion for the most part. The civil rights movement was deeply theological. The abolition of slavery, as I said, was the result of Christian revival. We have to base our laws on something. And if we don't have a basis for our laws, then there can be no laws. So if you say we can't protect babies because, well, that's just your that's just your religious perspective. Well, then why can't we, let's trot out the toddler. Well, why can't we kill 2-year-olds? You would say, well, you can't kill my 2-year-old because that would be wrong. Well, why do you think that's wrong? Well, because I think 2-year-olds are valuable. Well, I think infants, I think those before they're born are valuable. See, every law is based upon something, and the best basis for that, as we've seen over and over with so many of our laws in America, is the image of God. Number 15.
I am personally against abortion, and I would never choose it for myself. But I don't think I have the right to impose my personal beliefs on someone else. You cannot legislate morality.
So we reached out to, a dozen people and asked them to read these questions and rank them. My first plan was I was just going to try to answer 12 questions and give long answers. And this was one of the highest ranked questions, I believe. How do we answer this? I'm personally against abortion. And I wouldn't choose it. I wouldn't have an abortion, Pastor. But I don't think we have the right to impose our beliefs on someone else. Well, that sounds good, but let's break it down. There are some things that are preference, and then there are some things that are just right and wrong. You don't get to have a preference about some things. Now, whether you eat broccoli or cauliflower, that's a preference. Country music, a preference. Your football team, a preference. But killing somebody is not a preference, okay? There is a right and wrong to killing somebody. It is wrong. You see this, I think, demonstrated, the confusion about this demonstrated in the pro-choice bumper sticker. If you don't like abortions, don't have one. I've actually never seen that bumper sticker, but I hear that's a popular bumper sticker. If you don't like abortions, don't have one. Well, what's the problem with that? It's making abortion a matter of preference. You don't want an abortion? No abortion for you. You don't want vanilla ice cream? Have chocolate. Well, just show you the absurdity of that. What if you had this bumper sticker? If you don't like slavery, then don't own a slave. I mean, that'd be horrible to have that, right? Slavery is not just a matter of do you like it? What if the bumper sticker said, you don't like child labor? Well, then don't hire children. You don't like spousal abuse? Then don't hit your wife. If you don't like drunk driving? Then you don't drive drunk. No, those are not a matter of if you don't like it, don't do it. Those are issues of right and wrong. And so to say, well, I personally would be opposed to abortion, but I'm not going to put that on somebody else. They can have their preference. Well, no, this is not a preference. You don't get to have a right and wrong. You can have a preference. This isn't a preference. But there's another answer to this question. If they're really worried about imposing their beliefs on someone else, then what about the pregnant woman imposing her beliefs upon the child in the womb? I mean, let's go back to the question. I'm personally against abortion. I would never choose one for myself, but I don't think it's right for me to impose my personal beliefs on someone else. But that's exactly what someone does when they have an abortion. My personal belief is that my autonomy is king, and I'm going to force that belief upon my child by killing my child. And so it's a poor argument. Number 16. How are we doing on time? We'll go fast. Number 16.
If abortion is outlawed, desperate women will still seek them out, and many will die from unsafe, illegal procedures.
Okay, so you hear this a lot. Well, if we outlaw it, women are still going to have abortions. Now they're just going to have unsafe abortions. And they usually follow that by giving a statistic that before Roe v. Wade, 5,000 to 10,000 women a year died in unsafe abortions. The first thing you need to do is just ask them, well, where did you get that statistic? Because that has been proven to be inaccurate. Now, people did die, and so you can't say, well, that's completely untrue. It's not completely untrue, but it was not 5,000 to 10,000. There is another statistic that they don't want to talk about. A lot of women are dying having abortions today, even legal medical abortions. There's been a whole new report that's come out in the last few months about how many women are dying from the abortion pill, and especially because a lot of these are given without doctor supervision. But even in medical, mechanical abortion, lots of women are being permanently maimed. They're suffering permanent consequences, and some are dying. So it is true that people were dying before Roe v. Wade and coat hanger abortions, but it's not the number that they report. And it is also true that people die today in more controlled abortions. So if they start spouting numbers, you just need to calm them down and say, well, let's sit down, and these numbers are easy to confirm. The second answer to this, and this is a little snarky, but it's true. Let's say 1% of women die in unsafe, illegal abortions. That's horrible, right? That's tragic. 1% of women die. It is not that high. I mean, it wasn't that high before Roe v. Wade. It wasn't 1%. But just for math, what if 1% of all the women that went and got illegal abortions, what if 1% of those women just died? That would be a terrible thing, and that has never been that high. But let's just assume for a moment it is. Can I give you another statistic? 100% of the babies died. Okay. Now, I mean, I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, and you wouldn't want to use this argument with someone who's, in crisis. But should we be concerned about women having coat hanger abortions? Absolutely, we should be concerned with that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't to be concerned with babies. Yeah, women die from coat hanger abortions. Babies die from all kinds of abortions. And we can't ignore the babies that are dying by simply pointing to women who suffer in illegal abortions. Let me give you the third answer. If we assume the premise that 5,000 to 10,000 women died from coat hanger abortions every year prior to Roe, that's not true. But if we assume that, what's the solution? Should we just allow women to kill, and men? Hey, by the way, and I'm not an expert on this, but and I've not talked to 100 people who've had abortions and helped through, through the process, but a few. My experience is the abortion decision is at least half the time made by the man, not the woman, and it's a pressure kind of thing, or by parents sometimes. So I'm not just putting all of the responsibility on women. But if we assume the premise that 5,000 to 10,000 women died in coat hanger abortions before Roe, what is the solution? Should we just allow women to kill babies safer and safer? I mean, think about it. If we say, well, they're having these illegal abortions and 5,000 women are dying, what should we do? Well, let's figure out a safer and more efficient way for them to kill babies. No, that's not logical. That's not right. Perhaps we should find ways to curtail or prevent illegal and unsafe abortions. How's that as an option? Instead of just saying, well, 5,000 women are going to die from coat hanger abortions, so let's just let them kill more babies easier, safer. No, how about we figure out a way to address that? Why are so many women having, why do so many women feel like they're in a situation where they have to make a choice like that? Maybe that's where we should ask the questions. I'll give you an illustration. Some people will drive drunk no matter what the law says. Do you know that? When they do, they may crash and kill themselves. So should we just legalize drunk driving and build safer highways for intoxicated drivers? Or should we find ways to reduce the number of drunk drivers? And if people are going to drive drunk anyway, maybe we just say, okay, it's okay to drive drunk, and we're going to try to make your drunk driving as safe as possible. I mean, that's absurd, but it's the same thing. If we cannot stop people from doing something dangerous, the answer is not to make it legal. It is to ask why they are in such a desperate place to start with. All right, question 17.
Every child deserves to be wanted. Bringing unwanted children into the world only increases poverty, neglect, and child abuse.
Okay, so every child should be wanted. Well, wanted by whom? I'm telling you, every child is wanted. And if you know somebody who's pregnant with a baby and they think nobody wants that baby, you call your pastor. I know people who want that baby. So that's just not true. There are complexities in our foster care system. If there are 6-year-olds that are not wanted, and that's a whole nother talk we should have. But there are no unwanted, or very few unwanted babies. And we can't go through all of this. We just don't have time. But unwanted babies is not the source of poverty, neglect, and child abuse in America. And that is easy to document. If I had time, I would do so. We should also what? Just trot out the toddler, right? So what if you say we should kill babies in the womb because they are unwanted? Should we kill 1-year-olds because they're unwanted? Well, no, Pastor, we shouldn't kill those. Well, that answers the question. Number 18.
Restricting abortion disproportionately affects women and limits their education and economic opportunities. Whether you intend it or not, being pro-life ends up being anti-woman.
All right, so a few answers. What if that were true with no caveats? Well, let's just give them the premise. What if this is terribly unfair to women? Is that justification for killing babies? Okay, let's say that the world we live in, women get pregnant, and so their lives are just completely unfair. I don't believe that's the case, but if that were true, is the best solution to that to kill babies? It just doesn't logically follow. So that's answer one. Answer number two, you may not know this, but there are ways for women to not get pregnant, right? Abortion is not the only way not to have a child. You could not have sex, or there are contraceptive options available. I think when women say we have to have abortion to make things fair in the marketplace, I wonder what those women are really asking for. They're not just asking for, don't force us to be pregnant, because they can already make that choice. I'm not sure what they're asking for, but I think they're asking for sex without consequences. I just think it's way more complicated. In the question, well, the world is unfair to women, so we should have abortion. I think if someone says that to you, you just need to ask them, what in the world do you mean? Well, so we can't get the same jobs and we don't get the same pay and the promotion because we're pregnant. Well, if that's a bad thing, then don't get pregnant. Maybe I'm just missing something. But that's my answer number two. Let me give you my answer number three. Now that I think about it, there's probably things I'm not thinking about on answer number two. But answer number three, I'm in favor, and I think most of us are, of any reasonable laws that protect a woman's right to advance in her career. If Coca-Cola is paying women 80 cents on the dollar, well, then that's wrong. They ought to stop, okay? And I'm all for whatever reasonable laws to protect that. And then answer number three. So this will be the answer that would just I don't think it'll make any of you furious, but if you use this in a debate, they would probably have a stroke. Listen, God created men and women, and they're different, and their lives are different. And that's the way he did it. And you're a man, you're a woman. I don't know which is better. I like being a man, by the way, but I'm glad my wife is a woman. I don't know. I think us all of a sudden saying, oh, we've got this crisis. Men and women are different. I think my counsel, maybe, and ladies, you could tell me afterwards, this has been a long day, wait till tomorrow. You could tell me this is just being very insensitive. But I would say if one of our college young women said, I'm just all upset about my prospects in life because I'm a woman, and I would say what God wants you to do, I mean, if there are inequalities, those should be addressed. I'm not saying that they shouldn't, and I'm not saying there aren't inequalities. But embrace being a woman. God made you a woman. You know, be a woman. Be thankful for what God has made you. He has not made you inferior in any way. All right, we got to go to the rest. Question number 19. How many more we got? We'll go fast. 5 minutes.
You cannot call yourself pro-life if you support capital punishment. Even the Pope says so.
Even who says so?
The Pope.
The Pope. Yeah. He says a lot of things. Come back next week. So this is just another example of a category error. Abortion involves the intentional killing of an innocent human being. Capital punishment, whether you're for it or against it, is, at least in principle, the state executing someone convicted of a grave crime. Those are two different things. You could be for one and against the other one, independent. They're not connected. The answer number 2 is the Bible does support state-mandated capital punishment. Genesis 9:6, Romans 13:4. We won't try to make that argument today, but the Bible, and you could oppose capital punishment because you don't think it's carried out in a fair, equitable fashion, and I don't know. That'd be a big debate. But these are two separate issues, both logically and biblically. Number 20.
If you really believe abortion is murder, then should women who have abortions be prosecuted like murderers?
See, I didn't want to answer this one, but somebody turned it in. Because this is really not a part of the argument, right? Abortion, whether that's right or wrong, and whether women should be criminally held liable for abortion, those are two separate issues, right? You could believe abortion is wrong, and you could choose either side of the other debate. But I'll give you my answer. Answer number 1, our desire should be to show compassion to the mother and rescue the baby. I'm not all worried about we got to go out and put a bunch of women in jail. I think we go out and we need to save a bunch of babies. I think our focus should be on the babies. Answer number 2, this will get me in trouble. There are many factors where the parent's misinformed about the status of their baby. Was the mother pressured by partners or by medical professionals? Is the mother in crisis? Does the mother perceive this killing as this abortion as killing? We ask all those same questions in a murder case, right? So if you plan for 3 weeks to shoot your boss, and you set up and you ambush and you shoot him, that's capital murder. But if somebody just says something ugly to you and pushes you down at Walmart, and you stand up and you beat them up and they die, that's manslaughter. And then there are a bunch of in between. I'm not an attorney, but so when it comes to murder, there are a lot of considerations before they determine what you get charged with. And I think the same would have to be true if we criminalized abortion in the sense that mothers were held criminally liable. So there would be mitigating factors. So I don't think it's all premeditated murder. But what's my answer to the question? Let me read the question again. If you really believe abortion is murder, then should women who have abortions be prosecuted like murderers? Well, if we took that last part out, like murderers, should they be prosecuted? Well, yes. I think abortion should be a punishable crime. Now, I don't think we ought to be out to get mothers. I think we ought to be out to show compassion to mothers and to rescue babies. We have a lot of mothers, we have a lot of women in our church who have had abortion. I don't think they ought to go to jail. I'm glad you're in church. I'm glad God's forgiven you. I'm thankful God's forgiven me for a bunch of stuff too. But see, punishment is, there are 3 reasons. I'm way over on time, but the 3 reasons why we have punishment. You knock over a convenience store, you're punished. So one is punitive, right? We're punishing. We're going to make your life miserable. We're going to hurt you because you hurt somebody else. One is preventative. we tell you, if you rob a convenience store, you're going to jail. That hopefully will prevent some people from robbing a convenience store. So part of it's punitive, part of it's preventative, and part of it is educational. We're trying to educate people, you shouldn't rob convenience stores, okay? So don't quote me and say, well, the pastor thinks everybody that's had an abortion ought to go to jail. I don't think that. I don't think any of them should go to jail. But I think there ought to be some, I think having a law, if it's killing a baby, if we really believe that, it's killing a baby. So having a sensitive law that would educate and prevent child killing, I think is appropriate. And then answer number 3, trot out the toddler, right? So if somebody killed a toddler, all right, I'm just going to read the last 2 questions because I'm going to abbreviate them. You did an excellent job, Ethan. Number 21, families are allowed to withdraw life support for a terminally ill patient, sometimes even for financial reasons. Why is abortion morally different? Again, it's a category error. When someone is withdrawn from life support, that doesn't kill them, it's the underlying disease that kills them. Does that make sense? In abortion, the abortion kills them. You see, removing somebody from life support, turning off the respirator, you haven't killed that person. That person is going to die because they have pneumonia or cancer or 100 other things. They have died because of their illness. So that's not killing. But abortion, you're just actively killing. And then number 22, I didn't think anybody would be interested in this, but this one was at the top of a lot of people's list. Many Christians approve of forms of birth control that prevent or interrupt pregnancy. If abortion simply interrupts the same biological process at a later stage, why is it considered so morally different? Boy, I'm over my head on this one, but there are 2 different questions here. Number 1, if birth control that prevents fertilization, okay, think about that. If birth control that prevents fertilization, if that is okay, then why not abortion that ends pregnancy? Well, see, that's easy to me. Well, because abortion actually ends a life. Birth control that prevents fertilization, there's no life that's being destroyed there. The sperm is not allowed to fertilize the egg, but there's no life before there's fertilization. And so, there are, the Catholics would say that there are some problems with that. In fact, all Protestants, including Baptists, said that contraceptives were wrong until 1920s. Baptists preached, thou shalt not use contraceptives. You're surprised at that, aren't you? So I'm not going to preach that next week, I promise. But I don't see a problem. If there's a contraceptive that prevents fertilization, and of course that's okay. And that's not the same as killing a baby, because that's just stopping the sperm and the egg from coming together. However, and this is where it gets complicated, if we're talking about birth control that prevents a fertilized egg from implanting, then I think that is abortion. Now, probably a lot of people would disagree. This is a hot button topic amongst a lot of young people. If you go to any of our seminaries, people are punching other people in the nose in the hallways fighting over this. This is a pretty big issue. If the pill simply prevented, the birth control pill, there are a lot of different kinds. If it simply prevented a fertilized egg, so an egg that's been fertilized, the sperm and the egg have come together, the ovum. If the pill prevents the egg from implanting, if that's how it keeps you from getting pregnant, and if we believe that life begins at conception, Do you see where that's a problem? That's not birth control. That's abortion. Now, how do you know which drug you're taking? You talk to your doctor. I'm not even going to attempt. I couldn't even attempt. I know this. Most birth control pills, or I've read this, most pills work primarily by preventing ovulation. Some formulations may also alter the uterine lining in a way that could theoretically prevent implantation if the fertilization occurs. Because I believe that life begins at fertilization, and we talked a few weeks ago why we believe that, or why I believe it. I have many moral concerns about any contraceptive method that may function after fertilization. So how should you put this to your doctor? I would ask this question: is the primary intended function of this birth control to prevent ovulation before fertilization? And if he or she says yes, then I believe, my Catholic friends would disagree, but I believe that is fine. The other part of the question, though, that you ask your doctor, or is the primary intended function of this birth control pill to prevent implantation of a fertilized egg? If the answer to that question is yes, I think it would be problematic to take that birth control pill for the purpose of birth control. I think in that second case, that would be, I don't see the difference between that and an RU-486 that dislodges an implanted fertilized egg later on. But that's why you need to have a Christian doctor that you can sit down and have honest conversations with, and that's important. So that is the end of our abortion thing. We don't have time for questions, but I'll stick around if somebody has one afterwards. Thank you for sticking through this and even our extra 18 minutes. God bless you, and have a great week.